Welcome to Muscles and Malarkey, a podcast about all things strength, fitness, and fun. I'm your host, Mary. In today's episode, I sit down with Eric, a bona fide strength scientist and current PhD candidate who brings both brains and brawn to the world of fitness. We dive into his path into exercise, how Olympic weightlifting shaped his journey, and one of the scariest moments he faced at just 23 years old. Beyond the platform, Eric's true passion lies in his groundbreaking work in the neurological arena, especially with individuals living with Parkinson's disease. This conversation blends science, strength, and stories you won't want to miss. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, though, for real.
No, of course. Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I figured we could get into and talk a little bit about, you and your journey in fitness. Like, how did you get started in fitness and working out?
So I was probably 2011. Yeah, it was around when I got into college. I went from kind of just running because I was just racing motorcycles. So I used to race enduros and hare scrambles. And I realized that just like having a high, oxidative capacity or like aerobic capacity just wasn't enough. And so I found, as much as I don't like this sport and, for lack of a better word, pedagogy, I found CrossFit from one of my college roommates, and it kind of um, catapulted me into like resistance training, right? So I didn't know, probably back then, I didn't know the difference between a back squat and a deadlift. But I mean, when you, like yourself or most people, like you don't, like you are, it's a skill. It's an entire library of information. So I learned how to, resistance train, and then near the end of my college, so probably like 2014, I got into Olympic weightlifting because I realized that, being, fast and having a high aerobic capacity was fun, but being stronger was more fun. That's kind of how I got into Olympic weightlifting, which most people in this country got into American or Olympic weightlifting via CrossFit. And that's kind of initially how I got into it.
The time that you're describing, that 2011 into 2014, is really, I feel, the pinnacle time that CrossFit just skyrocketed. CrossFit got so popular and it really broadened the population
Mhm.
pool of people who were now gym goers and putting their hands on a barbell.
Yeah, I think that, the one credit that I have to give CrossFit, it's is that it brought in people because it is a community-based fitness program, or and I think that a lot of people in fitness, even if they have a coach, it's like you don't always have a coach for life, unfortunately, depending on, circumstances financially, what have you. And so going into a box gym or a CrossFit gym has at least allowed people to have some sort of direction, right? So it's like, you go in there and you don't have to think about what you're going to do, what machines, what lifts you're going to do. It's like, it's all written down. The issue is the lack of understanding of, exercise science principles, as well as just, safety and technique. It's ironic that a, organization chose like two, again, not the most high skill, but two of the most high skill sports, where it's like there are a couple movements and then people spend their entire athletic careers perfecting them, and then they just mash them together and say, okay, do these very complicated movements for time as fast as you can. Don't worry about technique.
CrossFit is very interesting in that regard. I agree with you. CrossFit did give people a toolbox of knowledge, a library of knowledge, and getting some basic understanding that most people would not have exposure to. You don't know what to Google if you have no idea what something's about.
Mm-hmm.
So it at least gives you that starting point. The problem is CrossFit became so popular that other group training classes became very popular. And as an outpatient OT, when I was working in the hand clinic, we would get a fair amount of people who were like, well, yeah, I was doing this CrossFit workout. Oh, yeah, I was doing this XYZ place fitness workout. They develop tendonitis, or they have just issues. And it's because they don't know proper form and the importance of how to structure a workout.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, again, before I transitioned to strictly Olympic weightlifting, there was a time I used to compete in CrossFit, and there's just an inability for anyone, coaching it. There's just no load management. And so that's where I think that, like you were saying with your patients and clients, like there's a lot of room for error in this movement in terms of like load management technique and everything else that goes with it.
It makes sense as to why you would kind of, as you got more education, why you would veer away from CrossFit more into strictly Olympic weightlifting.
I went to college for political science. I thought I wanted to go to law school, was studying for the LSAT, and always had an interest in physiology and biology. And then I took time off, got another undergrad degree, just online in exercise science, and then eventually got my master's exercise science and sports nutrition at Sacred Heart University in Fairfield, Connecticut. Yeah, even before, as I'm learning at the undergraduate level, oh my goodness, like CrossFit is not a good thing. And so yeah, that's where I kind of veered off and said, you know what, I need to stop promoting this movement because it's just not okay.
Now, what drew you specifically to Olympic weightlifting, though?
When I was still competing in CrossFit, my weakest point were the barbell movements. So your clean derivatives, your snatch derivatives, just general strength, your deadlift, squats, bench. So I took time off from the aerobic side of CrossFit. So your metabolic conditioning. I got a coach, and I was like, oh, having more fun just being strong and not missing the aspect of, wow, like my body hurts from doing, whatever 150 repetitions of a movement in 15 minutes. And so I just never went back. I was like, wow, like CrossFit's, kind of silly. Being strong is more fun.
I think it's funny because people will ask me frequently. They're like, "Oh, does your husband lift with you?" And I'm like, "No, he's a farmer. He has farm boy strength."
I was just going to say it's a different level of strength.
I'm very thankful that I'm a hefty, sturdy bitch and I can handle,
Absolutely.
like being strong is really cool and it's really, really helpful in your day-to-day life.
100%. Yeah, you hit the head on the nail, Mary. And I'll never not be a strength conditioning coach as well as like a weightlifting coach, but I'm actually getting into more clinical exercise physiology. So my ultimate goal is to work with Parkinson's patients. And so I'm writing actually a paper with one of my professors on how we are dichotomizing resistance training types, kind of having nomenclature to the literature for exercise being a form of medicine for Parkinson's patients, ALS patients, again, diseases or neurodegenerative issues. There is so much utility to being strong. There is so much utility, whether you're in a disease population or not, to being strong because, we're finding that muscle is a pseudo endocrine organ where it's like its utility, is just so vastly important in our just general health and physiology.
The thought that came to me when you were talking about what muscle is to us, I immediately thought it's that hack. Do you want to hack the system? Do you want to like cheat, whatever? I mean, obviously, there's some things that we just don't have control over, and there are
Sure.
things that happen to us, but there are so many things that can be prevented, or you can manage them a lot better if you have a good amount of muscle mass on your body.
Absolutely.
It's very powerful to hear that you and your professor are working on that population of neurological degenerative conditions. I immediately thought of two of my patients that I had when I was working up at a different location part-time. And it was one individual who was so, so, so incredibly sweet. And they got diagnosed with ALS and it
Horrible.
progressed very rapidly for them. I had another person who had Parkinson's. I've had a lot of Parkinson's patients, but this person was like very, very active at baseline and just wanted to be able to do some of the things that they were used to doing. So to hear how encouraging it is and how useful it is as a modality, as a medication, exercise is so important. Muscle is so important.
There's no like definitive clinical maybe like definition, but like we're finding that it can reverse the aging process. Generally speaking, it's a loss of like neuro function in the muscle, and then peripherally speaking, the muscle starts to degrade a little bit, I guess. In aging populations that we both work with, there is such a utility to being strong because you're creating new neurons, maybe not like resuscitating the old ones from our understanding. And so actually I was going to ask you the level of functionality of your patient, because that's another thing that I'm finding the literature is very confusing, where there is no clear definition on, or at least objectively speaking, levels of functionality. Because I've had a patient where his wife had to be there. He was, walker bound or almost wheelchair situated, where he had a hard time even having a normal gait. Whereas I had patients that if I saw them in the grocery store, I would never know they had Parkinson's because they were so high functioning until they began having their tremors or their freezing, which
Hmm.
I can go into in terms of more definitions as to what those are. But yeah, back to your patient, like I'm curious what level of functionality he or she had.
With the ALS diagnosis or the Parkinson's?
The Parkinson's, because I know ALS is extremely, unfortunately, fast acting in terms of degeneration, just systemically speaking.
I've never seen someone progress that quickly. I've had a couple like ALS people. I remember seeing them, and then within 6 months, it's like they could only lift their index finger.
It's horrible.
And to see it firsthand, it was a very lasting impression on me. The Parkinson's person, so they did live alone and they could get around without using a device. And the part of the reason why I was seeing them was to help with like adaptive equipment stuff because they did start having some tremors. So weighted utensils, universal cuffs can help. Just like different type of drinking utensils as well
Mhm.
can be helpful just to kind of adapt for those types of tasks. So yeah, they were still very functional, but it was like the early signs of that later stage, I would say.
Mhm. It's interesting in the literature where, there can either be some sort of issue with the inhibition of dopamine. So again, that's where you get your tremors, and then there's some sort of issue with the dopamine release, or at either the protein or the receptor, where they're having these freezes or freezing, and that's what concerns me in terms of diagnosing these patients in terms of functionality, because I'll admit it was a little concerning that a lot of the patients drove themselves, regardless of the high functionality of their condition. However, one of them would have freezing. So the first thing that I thought of was, what if your ankle plantar flexors froze and you couldn't get off the accelerator, and that's how you get to an accident? And it's like, I'm on the road, friends, family, or just other people. And so I think that there needs to be, again, down the road, a way to, scan the brain and see, okay, like, your level of functionality is this. Again, we have criterion to be able to say, okay, you can drive, or hey, Kathy, you probably shouldn't drive anymore. You need to
Mhm.
have someone to do this for you.
The amount of older people that still drive scares me sometimes. You've competed in Olympic weightlifting, correct?
Yeah, so actually, to kind of take a step back, I was prepping for a weightlifting meet in the fall winter of 2015, and I had a stroke. So I have a rare blood disorder from my mother's side. It's called a factor V laden blood disorder. So my blood clots super quickly, and I've lived my whole life without knowing that I ever had it. And it was kind of a perfect storm. It was in my senior year of college. I was pounding cough or just caffeine, not drinking enough water, not getting enough sleep, and training really hard. So it was like just a perfect storm, and I started to bleed in my brain around probably Halloween weekend, because I remember getting mild symptoms, and the ultimate symptom was just like these really horrible headaches. What ultimately happened is I was like throwing these clots in my arteries and veins, and one in the rear right hemisphere of my brain just kept growing and growing and growing. And there was just not there, my brain was like, okay, we can't create any more anastomoses or like bifurcations of arteries and veins. And ultimately I was pulled out of school, and then I went into a coma, had a stroke, got life flighted to Hershey Medical Center. They're a really good neuro center, and I was there for like 3 weeks. Like, actually, I just saw my new neurologist a couple days ago. So I was admitted December 6th. I was released December 23rd, right in time for Christmas.
I
Yeah.
was just about to say Merry Christmas. For the people who maybe don't know healthcare verbiage, you were talking about anastomoses and bifurcation of vessels. Can you like layman's terms that one for us?
Yeah, so you have arteries carrying oxygenated blood to your systemic circulation, and you have veins carrying deoxygenated blood to your back to your heart to get oxygenated, and then they eventually push all the blood back to your heart. Right? You have these two veins above and below your heart that carry that deoxygenated blood back. And anastomoses, or an anastomosis, or anastomosis plural, it's a really cool like biological safety mechanism, right? So if you look at like, like rivers, they start to like almost split off into like a little Y or like a T. And so your body's ability, if one gets clogged via like a thrombosis right before the clot, they will create another like stream of arteries and veins. And so ultimately, my vascularization in my brain was just like black. There was just no oxygen in my brain, which is wild that I'm even alive or not in a vegetative state. And bifurcations would be just like your splitting of these arteries or veins for a safety mechanism, which is biology is awesome.
I'm just getting like throwback to my undergrad when I was in college, and I'm just like, ah, yes, I remember all this. So
Yeah.
essentially, so what you're saying is you threw a clot and the clot was blocking the pathway for the blood,
Hmm.
and your body trying to help forked off regions where the blood
Hmm.
can go, but even those weren't working, and that backup of blood was so bad. So then you just weren't getting any blood flow to those parts, and that's why your scan would be black.
Absolutely. I actually don't remember exactly how I was air quotes cured of this swelling, because there was so much trauma to my brain that they didn't want to do surgery. So I didn't end up having any brain surgery. And so I wish I could give more information as to how my amazing neurologist essentially helped me get released from the hospital and get cured of this, so to speak. So I'm on blood thinners, but I've been having a lot of pressure in my head. So back to those, that flow of arteries and veins and those pathways, I think that I have a lot of scar tissue. And so as I'm getting older, again, as I haven't stopped lifting weights, again, back to our utility of being strong, I've been noticing I've been having a lot of residual pressure. And so I kind of had to find a way to allow myself to continue lifting weights safely while, making sure I don't throw another clot.
That's kind of important, not throwing another clot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, just to reiterate, you are 23 years old and you had a
Yeah.
stroke. A lot of the typical pre-indications for a stroke are like usually very unhealthy lifestyle, but you were very healthy and you still are very healthy. And the only reason you had that stroke was because you had this disorder you had no idea you even had.
Yeah, it's a scary thing. Knock on wood, I didn't have to learn how to walk again. I went to a speech pathologist. I went there for one session. I think even 20 minutes into say a 40-minute session, she was like, "Okay, we're done. We're good. You have no neurological deficits." The only thing I will say, I have really bad short-term memory issues. And so, I tell my students all the time, I know I've been jumping around, so I'm a college professor by trade as well as a weightlifting coach and a scientist. I wear many hats. Syllabus day, I tell my students, hey, like, please don't be offended. I may not know your name even by week 9 out of 16. Like, I find it fascinating in terms of the research. I'm just using myself as a case study. Once it's in my long term, it's normal like everyone else's. I don't have an issue recalling. But if it's like in limbo between being transported from short term to long term, again, whether it's schoolwork, someone's name, whatever it may be, that's where my deficit is. And
Mhm.
so, again, names as an example. I know everyone has a hard time with names, but I swear sometimes I will meet someone and then it's like I forgot that I met them, not that I forgot their name. It's just like I forgot that I interacted with this person. And that's what can be kind of scary. But again, back to exercising. What's good for the heart is good for the brain.
And people, I think, miss that. But
Hmm.
it is really important to train and get into some higher, like zone 2 cardio. You don't even need to go into zone 3, 4, 5. You can do some nice zone 2 cardio, and that still has heart health benefits. I think about how in past years, in the past couple of decades even, life was harder. Now, we do not have to work as hard to get food on the table. We have access to cheap, ultra processed food, and we have a society that we drive everywhere. We sit at an office. We don't really move. So
Hmm.
I think that it's very fair to say that we as a society probably need to move more, get some more steps in at the bare minimum.
100%. Yeah. I mean, getting up and walking, a couple laps around your office, getting a standing desk. Again, if that's something that's financially feasible in your office or, wherever people. Yeah. So I agree. Or one of my grad school professors at Sacred Heart would always say, and he's a big cardiac clinical guy, sitting is the new smoking. And to your point, it really is.
I am very passionate about strength, and I know that you are also very passionate about strength. So that was a big reason why I wanted to have you on here To circle back a little bit to your Olympic weightlifting, you were prepping for a meet at that point in time. Did you ever end up competing in Olympic weightlifting?
Oh yeah, no, yes. Since my release, so again, that again transition from winter 2015 to 2016, I've been competing in Olympic weightlifting for about like 9, 10 years. Yeah, I've competed in probably a little over a dozen meets. I think that's what separates a good coach from a great coach is the minutia that you can give your athlete or client or again a patient. I think that's what really separates like the good clinicians from like the great clinicians. And so
Mm-hmm.
again, to our point, we have graduate degrees. I did want to touch on this because I think that's a huge pebble in my shoe that I've had since getting my master's, even maybe a little bit before, is that like the exercise science or coaching world is so watered down because everyone can get into it. There's such a low ceiling to enter it, right? And again, there is nothing wrong with certifications, but I think that someone who, again, say they have their bachelor's degree in like accounting, it's like they want to be a coach. It's like, okay, just go back to school. You need a like foundation. I wouldn't just say, oh, I love numbers, so I'm just going to go to a bank and start doing someone's taxes. It's like, no, that's not how this works. But this day and age we live in has allowed the bar to be so low to say, oh, I'm just going to become a coach. I'm going to become a professional coach. And now you and I are competing with people who have a weekend certification, or if they have $500 lying around, they buy an online certification and take the exam, but they don't really have a true understanding of training principles and exercise physiology and kinesiology, and so that's what really frustrates me as a coach.
Wholeheartedly agree. I resonate with that for so many reasons. I have a thorn in my side, you have a pebble in your shoe, because I think that it is completely oversaturated. And that is one negative of social media, is that someone can do 2 powerlifting meets or 2 weightlifting meets. I can only speak in the perspective of powerlifting world. And they say, I'm a coach. I was looking at some personal training certs online, just kind of like looking around and seeing the differences.
Sure.
And more than one of them said, you can pay to take this exam right now. Not even go through our course, not even learn our material. If you have some background and knowledge, you can just take our exam. And if you pass it, you can say that you're certified.
That's crazy. I did not know that.
I did not know that either. It's interesting to me. And it's frustrating too, because to your point about having a higher level of education, I went through OT school, which was a 5-year master's degree, and I took not just one class one time involving anatomy, physiology, kinesiology, and like how people move. I went on and got my personal training certificate, and I appreciated having the knowledge that I knew from OT school, because it made it easier to understand the stuff that I was reviewing essentially in this personal training cert. And I thought about people who don't have any background in how bodies move, anatomy, physiology, anything, and you're trying to teach yourself through a textbook. That's really difficult. Textbooks are not people.
No, they're not. And they tend to be like 3 to 5 years behind just like the current literature, which is really unfortunate.
And I think it's also interesting because you learn about 10% of what you need to know in school, and the rest is through experience.
So well said.
You get your base knowledge, and then you go out and you apply it, and you learn from that actual, the feedback that you see in real time with someone.
And then just, yeah, trial by fire, man. Yeah.
Experience is the best teacher.
Yeah,
But you know
absolutely.
who else is a pretty good teacher?
Who?
Eric Lobatovsky. What do you teach?
Oh, that was a nice segue. I teach exercise physiology and kinesiology. So I used to teach at Sacred Heart University in Fairfield, Connecticut. I like labs the most because you have just more time to spend with your students as a teacher, as well as getting your hands dirty, so to speak, right? So it's like the advanced strength conditioning was teaching how to use like some of the technology we have. So this could be in a whole nother podcast, but transducers, which looks at barbell path as well as speed, which you can translate via physics equations to power and force, as well as just teaching how to teach the barbell back squat or a barbell bench press or a power clean. So again, like, the biggest thing that I used to say to every one of my students was, especially because most of them wanted to be physical therapists, OTs, PTs, ATs, the best clinicians that I know were also strength and conditioning coaches, because we use the same exercise principles. The only difference as a strength and conditioning coach is that I break people down, you build them back up as an OT, PT, AT, right? But we use barbells, kettlebells, dumbbells, machines. We use it all.
This is something that I could go, you want to talk about a whole other podcast. I think the tough part with working in outpatient for me personally was people would not have the buy-in of what I was trying to teach them. Because people want that instant gratification. They want to be better yesterday, and they don't realize that you don't heal a rotator cuff tear in 6 weeks. But the doctor will say, I can do surgery on that, and then you can go and do therapy. But the number of times I've had patients come in and they're like, yeah, I'm just here to do my 6 weeks of therapy before I have my surgery because insurance is making me do this.
Man, that is a whole nother podcast. And I'm not even in the clinical side, but I mean, I'm sure insurance just buggers things down in terms of, you as a coach slash clinician trying to give exercise prescription as medicine to your, like, again, like you just said, it's like, oh, I'm only going to do this because my insurance is going to cover it. It's like, well, Jane Doe, this rotator cuff is going to take longer than a month and a half to heal.
But it's
Yeah.
possible. I've seen recently a shift from Achilles injuries, if it's not a full tear, that they're trying to avoid surgery now because they've seen that the body can do almost like a better job of healing itself. It just isn't as quick of a solution.
Yeah, no, that is absolutely true.
People think that surgery is the solution to all of your problems, and it's such a lazy mentality to have because guess what, bucko? You might get that right labral tear repaired surgically. You still have to come and see me and do therapy for that. And
Exactly.
honestly, if you don't do your therapy after the surgery, you're probably not going to have a great outcome. So good job. You played yourself.
Exactly. Not to mention, it's like it's not going to come back to its full working capacity if you don't keep up with your physical therapy, your occupational therapy. I think it's interesting that I think that's a whole other field of psychology being that field. Almost having like the carrot and stick act, where it's like, okay, like, if unless you can think of something that would allow them to create a higher level of buy-in, like.
And that's part of the psychological component of occupational therapy. I mean, if I was better when I was in school, I could have gotten a minor in psychology, but I didn't want to do that. So you take a lot of psych in OT. And it's important because you have to learn how to work with people, how to build rapport with people, but also understanding how to speak to people so that you can motivate them and
Mhm.
finding ways to bring that motivation out of people.
No, for sure. I need to come up with some different strategies with that with my students, because some get it, some don't, where it's like, hey, listen, you want to be the best PT, OT, whatever it may be. You not caring enough to learn your planes of motion and your anatomy, even at just the undergrad level, is not going to serve you when you get to grad school. You want to do all the fun and sexy things, but this is the stuff that will help you be able to do the fun and sexy things.
And
Yep.
it's the same thing with exercise too. The not so exciting stuff, like, yeah, it's really cool to deadlift 300 pounds, but like, you want to know how you deadlift 300 pounds? It's deadlifting 100 pounds with good form.
100%.
And then you get real good at the cool, sexy things.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
Build upon everything.
So that kind of segues me into a question I like to ask people to round out our time together. I want you to think of a time, and this can be at any point in your fitness journey, where you look back and you're like, what the heck was I thinking?
I look back at some of the old programs I wrote in like 2018, and I'm just like, this is so silly. This exercise with this amount of it's just like nonsensical. So I can't think of anything specifically like in the gym, other than maybe going from program. So again, from pen to paper to the gym, where it's like my exercise prescription was just so outrageous, almost to the level of a CrossFit, where it's like, why would I give Jane Doe, who's just into a basic strength block. Oh, why did we just go to from like sixes at 65% to triples at like 90%? Their tissue is not ready for this. Their nervous system is not ready for this.
I'm going to have you on because there's been a couple points throughout our conversation that I'm like, oh, I really want to dig into that. Oh, I really want to dig into that. And what you just talked about is something I really want to dig into. And that's people not understanding the effect your central nervous system has on executing a strength task.
I mean, again, I'd love to come back and talk all about like exercise prescription as it relates to central and peripheral fatigue. The motor neurons are just unable to fire at the same rate, right? And so we have, again, almost giving everyone a little taste. Again, I love this is my area. I love nervous system, muscle physiology stuff. But you have what's called rate coding, so the speed at which your motor neurons are sent from brain to tissue, and then you have motor unit recruitment.
Oh, Eric, I know that we could sit here and chit chat. I'm definitely going to have you on again. Maybe season 3. Have you back
Okay,
on and we can talk about some more sciencey things.
I would love that.
I can tell you're passionate about these topics, and I love to talk to people about things they're passionate about. So I'll definitely
Same
have you
here. Yeah,
on.
love talking show. Yeah, I'd love to be back on. This was a really fun experience. So thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode, please follow, share, rate, and review. It helps the podcast grow and reach more people. Do you have any questions or suggestions? Email me at musclesandmalarkey@gmail.com or find me on Instagram at musclesandmalarkey. Yeehaw and yee-claw, everybody.